Today's panel, we want to hear from people in our community that are actually involved in these kind of collaborative spaces, and we want to say, well, what's it been like for you? So we're trying to get people from our group to come to the stage and be these panelists who will help us understand and interact with Howard, and I think that'll be very helpful and interesting for us as the day continues. So the first person, our panelists, will be Chris Wright, the Managing Director of the Edmonton Public School Board. Chris, thank you, and come on up, come on down, as they say. Craig Weber, Principal Group 2 Architecture. He'll represent up front here as well. Jeff Sterling, Managing Partner and Principal at Delnor Construction. Thank you, Jeff. And Jason Collins is the President of Collins Steel, also on the ECA board, and great to have these people up here. So they've run IPD projects, and they've had a great high degree of collaboration. And we met for dinner last night at the Hardware Grill and had very interesting, open, honest, revealing conversations about their experiences, and I hope that the best of that you'll be able to hear today. So all these people are here. I'd like you to welcome them to the stage, give them your encouragement, big hip cheer for Chris Wright, Craig Weber, Jeff Sterling, and Jason Collins. There they are. Thank you.
Thank you. This is going to be our Winter Olympics here. What we're planning to do is I'm going to ask a series of questions to the panel to get things started. If someone actually has a question, I didn't tell them I was going to do this, by the way. If somebody wants a question from the floor, if you can find someone with a microphone, let's ask questions people are really interested in. So what I'm probably where I'm going to start is maybe with Jason, and really ask you, what surprised you most about doing an IPD project, or what do you wish you'd known before you'd started one?
It's a good question, and I got to confess, myself, operationally, I haven't spent a lot of time on the IPD team as my people have, so I'm representing them and their perspectives. I think what surprised me most is the velocity with which they caught up to speed on, we've done 8 IPD projects now, different types. 3 have been completed, 5 are in process, and we've been able to use different people on each project, and the velocity with which every team gets up to speed, despite the fact that they're so uncomfortable and doubtful that they can do it, because the IPD experience argument, which is really a redundant argument, as you had mentioned in your presentation. So I think that that's what surprised me. What I wish I had known before, I don't know. I can't answer that. I think what surprises me is the ability for the team to come together, because like you had mentioned, it becomes a virtual company. And that's the mentality that surfaces very quickly, and finger pointing doesn't live in those rooms. Accountability does. And I think our people love it. They get to practice what we do in our organization, which is lean. So
okay.
It's very applicable.
So Jeff, is there something we forgot to tell you wish you'd known?
It's definitely been an interesting curve just getting new into the IPD experience. We do a lot of CM projects, a lot of those types of, I want to call it collaboration as well. But yeah, it's definitely been, there's a lot of time that's spent up front. There's a lot of commitment from the teams to get in the, call it the big room, or get together and collaborate with a very open concept. You need to get ideas on the table. You need to share. You can't leave the room without making a decision. There needs to be a lot of discussion around goals and targets, but then at the same time, you need the decision makers there that can say, we need to do this, let's act on it and take the next step, rather than walking away and saying, well, we didn't really accomplish anything. So I think the goal of having everybody in the room, making sure everybody's working together, talking about the issues, putting it on the table, and then making a decision, having that process in place, I think has really changed kind of the way that we initially maybe thought the process might work. So it's been a very interesting one for us.
Hey, Craig, Group 2 has done a number of projects. What surprised you?
how little the general contractors knew about about putting a building together, and the only people who were more clueless were the architects. So, just how much the two organizations that are usually looked at to lead the construction industry forward don't know about all the pieces that go into it. So, the real sort of value of bringing in the trades and the people doing the work in the field, and how that changes your approach to everything you do.
You know, that, Craig, that relates to something I think you said last night that might be interesting, which is, how do you think doing IPD projects has affected your firm as an architectural firm?
Well, I won't characterize the whole firm, but I'll say we've been doing it for just 3 years. We're starting our 8th project. I've probably learned more in the last 3 years than I did in the first 20-some of my career, just in terms of what actually goes into it, and changed the way I looked at the industry, because I didn't believe the 50% waste. So it changed the way I've looked at those stats and figures and data, because it's tough to wrap your mind around an industry that is so broken. But once you start to see it, you can see it everywhere.
So, Chris, I know that Edmonton's got a couple projects going right now that you're in the middle of. Anything that's been surprising so far that you didn't expect?
I would say, like Jason said, first of all, we're very pleased to be up here today. I'm representing our organization and channeling some of the feedback that I've heard. I think that the management and the importance of the co-location in the big room became apparent to us quickly, and it is an art. It's not just about hucking a group of professionals, all very capable, in a room. If the co-location isn't managed properly, and if the co-location isn't done in a strategic fashion, either you're going to have some waste or some front-end load that is drawing the project down, or you're going to make it very easy for folks to resort back to some silo thinking. So managing that and doing it to the proper extent has been something that's been a learning curve. I think that's probably our biggest one up front, yeah.
Yeah. We've talked about a lot of things about collaboration and the advantages of it, but Jeff, when would you not want to do an IPD project? When would you say no?
I think just based on what we've heard and seen, to me there's maybe a couple things. One of the things that would stand out would be owner involvement is critical. We've all worked, or maybe I shouldn't say we've all worked, but we've all seen different clients that either want to be involved in the day-to-day, they want to be right involved with picking the flooring and the light fixtures and everything, to the other extreme, which might be an owner that just wants to show up at the ribbon cutting ceremony and just wants their building built because maybe that's not their core business. I think you need to have an owner that wants to be involved in the project and that wants to be a part of that decision-making process. But I think they also need to be able to hand over some of that authority and decision for the betterment of the team. So if you have an owner that isn't willing to commit the time or isn't willing to invest in that project with the team, I don't think it would work. And that, in my mind, you need an owner that's willing to be part of that process, full in, hands-on all the time, because they're one of the major decision makers. I also think there could be ones where if there's a certain size of project, I think you touched on it earlier, where to make the collaborative process work, you need the big room time, you need time to get together and set that up. I don't think a short, quick turnaround project would necessarily be the best choice for IPD, only because you wouldn't have that enough time at the front end to collaborate effectively.
Okay. Anybody else want to comment on that question? When would you not want to do IPD? Or when would you run screaming? How's that?
I would do it anytime, but it does make sense. I mean, the size of the project, if you're not an experienced team or you're not comfortable with the process, it does take time to get up to speed, and it's not worth the investment on a smaller project, as you had kind of alluded to. But based on the sentiment of our staff, they never not want to work on IPD projects. They're putting their hands up and they're racing to the front of the line to get involved in those because of their experiences. So I would always be open to it personally, but there is rationale.
Okay. Every once in a while you run into somebody who says change is easy as long as I don't have to do anything differently. And that's kind of the thing you want to avoid in some ways. But Chris, I know that there's a number of owners present, but what you know, if somebody walked up to you in the hall and said, I'm thinking about doing an IPD project, what advice would you give them? What would be the first thing you'd actually suggest that they think about?
So I guess there's a couple of perspectives. You've heard a lot about owner involvement and time up front by all stakeholders. And, you know, it kind of reminds me of my financial investor, and we'll see how that plays out down the road. But the RSP, Chris, it's a long game here. You gotta front end load it. It's sure gonna help you down the road. There is an element of front end loading the project that the owner has to be committed to. But there's a huge upside. I mean, the amount of expertise and professional development that you see in your shop as a result comes back and pays dividends. Staff are engaged, but there is a huge component, and it's across a number of teams, and so it depends on the capacity you have in your shop versus working with some professionals. But that capacity, from project management to stakeholder engagement to legal to planning, land use and zoning and permitting, a range of folks are involved up front, and you have to have your mind around that before you get in. The other thing, I think you can't sidestep into this arrangement. This has to be something that you approach with confidence. It takes a lot of confidence, especially on the owner side, and I'm sure with all of our participants, it's a lot of straight talk. As you mentioned, it's a lot of transparency. A few warts come out, and so approaching it with confidence is a requisite.
Okay. Craig, so you're walking down the hall and you run into one of your colleagues, probably not at group 2, and they say, hey, you know, there's this IPD RFP out, but this design by committee thing, I don't really want to do this at all. What advice would you give them to thinking about it from an architect standpoint?
I think probably one of the biggest things would be, I think almost any firm could find people within your organization that would be very successful in this. The other thing is every firm that's here and represented, you could find people in your organization that would be very unsuccessful in this environment, because you have to be very collaborative. You have to be very open to change, responsive to change. That's really one of the parts of what Chris was talking about in terms of the time spent building a team. You're creating a new organization, and that new organization needs a culture of coming together and really collaborating, going beyond just the words of it and what that means. So if I was giving advice, I would say, if you're putting a team together, don't pick your team based upon their experience. Pick them based upon their willingness to learn. You don't need somebody in the room that knows everything. You need somebody in the room that's willing to learn anything.
Jeff, what would you tell a contractor who actually came up and asked you the same question?
Yeah, no, I agree with what the panel's saying, is that we would need to, it's such a team environment that you have to be very open to ideas and suggestions. You don't want to have anybody that thinks they know more than the other person. You want somebody that actually wants to learn more from the rest of the team and then make those decisions. So I would agree that it takes a lot of trust to have that team environment and to give up some of that control that, you know, many of the contractors or owners or consultants would typically be used to having in the past. So I think giving up some of that control, it would be a big challenge. So you need people with that mindset going into it.
You know, you talked about staffing a little bit, but how do you think it affects your workflows? Does it change the way you actually manage the work?
For us, it definitely has. Coming into an IPD project in this last year, there's a lot of time up front. So just committing the staff, there's administration support. Even when we talk about the transparency, when it comes to costing, it's a cost-based system, so you have to find out what true costs are minus profits and overhead. So that in itself is a challenge for, you know, sub-trades, contractors, consultants. It was a bit of an interesting process. So learning what costs were on a cost-based management model versus profit built in takes time, takes an understanding, takes a sophistication to a certain level. So there's a commitment there as well to have that transparency throughout.
Chris, you talked about more work early up front. Do you staff these projects differently?
So we do, but again, it calls on us to up our game as a professional organization in organizing for these things. I think that you'd have to look at the load of your program over a period of time before you commit to something like this. We can't necessarily always staff to it, but we certainly are very strategic in how we staff the project, because I think that we've all touched on, Jason made the point again, it becomes a little virtual organization, and so you're staffing to the project as much as I'm staffing the shop up or down with Dr. Parker at the school board. So,
So Jason, does it affect the workflow inside your, from a specialty contractor standpoint?
I think we can be a little bit more strategic with who we deploy and at what time. It permits the people who are generally victimized by the process of construction to actively engage in creating a project plan. So I'm talking about our tradespeople versus just our managers and our overhead. So they get to enact in the planning of the project, and they really know what the problems are. So getting them to come to the table has been a challenge because it's not an offer that they often get. I mean, we're talking about guys that have been doing this 15, 20, 30 years, and now you're asking them how to design, you're asking an erector how to design a structure. So it allows us that opportunity. So
How do you onboard your staff or your team to get them ready for an IPD project?
okay, so generally we went through that process internally when we create our own delivery methods for our product in our silo. So essentially, we have developed project pull plans for quite a number of years. We try and take that principle and apply it to now engaging them into design, not just planning what's going to show up when. Now they get to actually have input as to how this building will look. So we're just taking it a step deeper now.
I think if
You
I could
look
build
like you're,
on,
I was
sorry,
going
if
to
I
say,
could
Jeff,
build
you
on
look like you're
Jason's-
going to make a
yeah.
comment.
I'm just talking, when you look at resources and manpower, I mean, from our perspective as the contractor, we have certain personnel and staff, like a superintendent or a foreman, that we have in mind for the projects, but being IPD, it takes months of design and implementation and planning to get to that stage. So keeping those resources either busy or available for the project in mind is a bit of a challenge. So the workflow does change a little bit on the field level because you want to make sure that you have the people available when you need them. So meeting those start dates are critical to make sure that we have the people that we want ready to go.
Chris, there were some discussions about public projects here in terms of how have you managed trying to make sure that everybody inside the organization and sort of the funding groups and such actually has an understanding of what you're doing and why you're doing it?
So I think that's always a challenge. It comes back to some collaboration, some communication. First off, with the people that are involved in the project, the more collaboration that we have, the quicker your overall capacity and your overall expertise in the shop is increasing exponentially as you go through the project and move from one to the other. And a lot of that transfer of information and that understanding about how and why we do it, and the ownership and the engagement about being a signator and being a partner in the deal, just as I said, ups the game. You'd be surprised where I think the team learns things. We've learned that the steel guys really lead the charge on the overall thinking around lean processes, and so being able to extrapolate that to our shop really helps everybody's overall expertise. As far as our other stakeholders, whether it's our board of trustees or senior executive, there's an ongoing requirement for our team through Dr. Parker and I to be engaging in that discussion and working at devolving that information because this is new and it is you know, in the case of the public owner, there's going to be new bits that are always going to be a bit unexpected and certainly need some communication around our institution. Yeah.
Okay. Craig, either from a project standpoint or from a Group 2 standpoint, what do you see as the important benefits of IPD?
I think one of the sort of really unexpected benefits is the learning curve that can be expedited for people within your organization, how fast young people can advance in their careers and knowledge in this process, because it's truly collaborative. You have some freedom to try new things, and if you do make a mistake, you've got a whole team behind you to solve the problem. So they just generally, that learning curve for young people. The second thing is innovation. They release innovation in a way that haven't seen in any other project delivery type, because you're free to explore stuff, and even if not everything works out, as you said, problems happen on a construction site, even with an IPD process. What doesn't happen is your first response isn't to generate paperwork to cover your ass as to why the mistake happened in the first place. The first thing that happens is you start on the solution, and most of the solutions that were required never move past the day in the big room. So the speed.
Jeff, most of the CMs and contractors I work with report that actually their profitability is good under IPD, and actually in some ways maybe better than average, but it's not a place where you can hit it out of the ballpark. So from a general contractor standpoint, what have you seen as the value to you of IPD processes?
I think it's a good point in that from a construction manager or contractor risk, it's a limited risk because it is a cost base. Your costs are paid. Your profit is what is at risk. So you're not going to hit that home run, but also you're going to have a much more stable and reliable project in the end. So that from a construction management risk, it's minimal from a cost point because your costs are paid for.
So from anyone else, what they see as really sort of the important benefits either to them or to the industry of IPD or a highly collaborative approach? Yes.
I sure like the value that comes out of this. I mean, for a public owner and for a school board in particular, the value for us is about leaving a legacy of excellent learning facilities behind for communities, for generations to come, and being able to have that value embedded in the IPD process. And you'll see the team come together at the beginning, and I think that there's a range of what's thought to be values being brought to the project. But the system forces everybody to talk and collectively agree on what the values for the project are. And I think you'd be surprised how quickly those values align. They're not that different. And so for public owners to know that you're leaving the absolute best learning environments that you can behind for kids and community is really great. The other thing that I think is really important that comes out of this, and you've heard it a lot today, but there's a big difference around a plan to be collaborative. And structured collaboration in the IPD world. And, you know, the plan to be, my joke last night was Mike Tyson says everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. So you can plan to be collaborative and then things start to go a little bit sideways, and that is tested, and it really takes every effort. Your diagram with the ball rolling off the top, you're balancing that all the time. In IPD with the teams that are responsible for the project and the definitions and the terms and conditions within the contract, and of course the compensation model whereby, you know, as everybody gets across the finish line on time and on budget, that's when it works. It's the bedrock for the project is that collaboration. There's a big difference, and for us that's a huge benefit as an owner, I believe, yeah.
Jason, any comments on that?
Yeah, I don't know that I have much more to add. I just like the predictability and the transparency, and we're all in. So, as you alluded in your presentation, it's very rare that everyone in a traditional delivery model will benefit or profit on a project, and I find that to be true. I don't think anyone is out there to hit home runs. It's nice to do that, but what is a home run these days? I don't know. I would equate it to getting out of a project what you expected and not being surprised by profits or losses. And I like the predictability of it, and I like the fact that we're all in. So there's no point in pointing fingers. We're all in on the solution.
One of those things is when we do these presentations, we tend to talk about money a lot, probably because people are vaguely interested in money. But in actuality, when you set up IPD projects, you can actually use goals that are not purely money, and they can be tied to money, or they can be management goals that they're discussed of there. Or you may actually say, we want to spend every dime we have, but we want more value. We want a better building. You have to actually craft the IPD business risk-reward model to match what that particular owner wants. And we probably have done it maybe 15 more different ways to try to actually match what the project outcome you're looking for to the risk-reward model that you have. So we talk in money, but it's not just a money thing in terms of defining what is success on the project, which leads with one of those other things is really ask everybody to comment on, which is what do they really think are the key factors? If these are the benefits, what are the key factors do you think have to exist or on an IPD project in order for you to achieve those benefits?
I think we talked a little bit last night too about what is the value from an owner's perspective, what's the value from a contractor's perspective. I think the example that came across the table was there was I think you said $100 million lab project that came in at $80 million, And the owner said, well, I wanted a $100 million lab, so what am I going to do with the 20? I could have got more lab for the money. So I think that value definition at the beginning is critical, because then you can really measure the benefit at the end to see, did you actually succeed? From us, it's the same thing. We want repeat clients. We want repeat business as a construction manager. So to us, the value is that next project, that next IPD, that next venture together, let's call it, because then that's truly, to us, what's successful.
Craig?
I think maybe one of the things, it's interesting because when you hear the projects talked about kind of after the fact or at a high level, oftentimes that dollar amount under budget is what's talked about. But what's interesting is that there are very few people who actually directly benefit from those dollars under budget in the room, in the big room. So the team's not as motivated by, increased profits to the construction company or increased profits to the steel fabricator. They're motivated by doing better and creating solutions that work, finding better ways to do things, avoiding frustrations that happen in the field. So the motivations of the team is mostly about improving the process, and the result is the lower cost. So I think go into it with the right team that's focused on those things, and they'll deliver you budget savings after the fact.
Chris?
I think intrinsic or requisite to it is a little bit of, I know I just talked a little bit about confidence. I want to back that up. There's also a bit of vulnerability that you have to do, and some trust. If you walk into the big room and you got it all figured out, we're in a bit of trouble, right? And that dynamic, or a piece of that dynamic, can really throw things into flux. And I think if there is some transparency and some trust, which, as you mentioned, inherently may not be present in other project delivery models, then the project has a much better chance of succeeding.
Yeah, and the big benefit is I think people get to behave the way they want to behave or the way they desire to behave. And they get to contribute that which they educated themselves, which is intelligence, rather than being victimized by a process. So my experience from my employees is that they're more encouraged and want to stick with construction a little bit longer, rather than look to get out of the project management department at Collins and get into manufacturing and get into other things, because we get to influence the outcome in these projects. So that's the big benefit, is we get a population that is more encouraged about their future in construction. And they are impervious to profit because they're not owners. I mean, they care more about their work environment and their professional future and the stability of the company that they work for. So, and they take pride in what they do. So they get to practice that. That's the biggest benefit.
Okay, we've got about 9 minutes left for the panel, and so I'm going to actually give them an opportunity to do sort of like a closing statement of what they think is most important. But we could probably work in 1 or 2 questions if somebody has a question from the floor. Yes?
I've really enjoyed this presentation, Howard. It's excellent, and I can tell you that our industry sees IPD as an extreme value. One of the things that I think that I'd like to mention is that I think that we have talked about large projects, but I think that there's a mini IPD that can be used throughout many of Alberta's communities and whatnot, which have a lot smaller projects. Our industry itself has got about 80 to 90 members. About 60% of them are 30 members or less. They do a lot of work, which I call meat and potatoes, that every day is important to the small community of Lamont or Vegreville or whatever in the province. And what we need to do is to always empower them to basically take advantage of some of the things that are being used in the bigger context. And what we see is that they need to change that client needs to change their idea of just thinking about hiring an architect or an engineer or a contractor, but hire the team. And even though the process on a large project could be extremely large, right, and complicated, it still can happen at that front end at the beginning, and that aligns all the opportunities. So I would just ask you to basically maybe give us some thoughts on that, but at the same time, just make sure that this kind of integration is something that can be used not only for the very large, but right down to the very small.
Techniques can be used on virtually any size. They work better if they're in a full contractual arrangement. And if you've done it over, and if you've got experience, it scales down to almost any size. So that's done. But actually, I'd like to have comments from the panel. Anyone want to comment on that?
So we've done a few now. So we have 5 that are completed, and it's if you go in with team members that you've already built up some of those relationships with, and you don't need the entire team to be exactly the same. You just need some key building blocks that you can build around that's expedite sort of that formative kind of phases. Yes, it scales down, and the people that have been doing it in the States, Sutter Foundation and Sutter Health, they're scaling it down even smaller than we've seen here to projects under 500,000, but with sort of formulated teams.
And I think that forums like we've seen through Edmonton Construction Association and elsewhere, where from the perspective of a public owner, I think if you're committed to that collaborative intent, that spirit, then there's, it's implicit on forums like ECA or on an individual basis, that collaboration needs to extend out and working with partners and other organizations and that sort of thing in the region. And I think there's opportunity from the ownership perspective to, as Ken's talking about, build that overall capacity and confidence and familiarity with some of this stuff. And so I think that's an opportunity that we can really look forward to moving forward.
Okay, I think we can take one question, then I'd like to close up with the panel.
Can you speak to some IPD failures?
Okay, somebody was also going to talk behind me, but IPD failures and examples. Out of the 130 projects that we've done, there's one project where a team, I think, may not get any profit at all. One. There have been no mediations, no arbitrations, no litigation, no, in fact, hard closeouts. By the way, the team members doing that said they'd happily do it again. They think it would have been a disaster any other way, but it is not a happy instance not to make profits. There are a couple projects, there are a number of projects out there, these would be very rough numbers, probably 10%, in which the profit made is less than the originally estimated profit by some amount, usually not a huge amount. The rest of them have been at profit or above profit. So real honest-to-God failures. And we've had some projects that have taken really serious hits. We had one where we had to terminate the architect of record on a $250 million tower in the middle of design development. That's a big ouch. And it hit the project hard. The project is actually finishing on schedule and slightly under budget with a replacement architect. So it's one of those things you find is that the projects are pretty resilient, but it doesn't mean every single project's been a phenomenal success. There have been projects which have come out and they've kind of looked the end result. They've only been sort of decent. But there have been a lot of projects that have been a lot better. Those have been some of the crashes we've seen, or the less than stellar. By the way, if you're interested in what goes wrong, on my LinkedIn site, which is just Howard Ashcraft, there's a series of little 4-page white papers. One of them is called Missed Opportunities, What Goes Wrong on IPD Projects, and it talks about things we've seen that didn't work well, which I think is important to know as well. So with that, any closing comments you guys want to make in terms of if you'd like people to remember one thing besides your name, what is it?
Well, I would say to the construction community, and I hear it a lot, I don't have IPD experience, so I'm not qualified to be submitting IPD tenders. I would say that that's not true, and I think you had articulated that in your message. I think if you look at the principles and you can get in alignment with the principles, you can do that. I don't think my company in my industry is the best IPD partner. Maybe we are, maybe we aren't, but I don't think I have a significant advantage over the next guy, and I'm being transparent about that. I think that my competitors can do this, and that I want to encourage my competitors to get involved in the RFP processes so that we can sharpen each other, because it is about stewardship for me, and I think I think government is taking a lead, and I'm very encouraged by that, because they're being very accountable for the dollars that they spend on our behalf, and I think that we need more people to get involved in this. So yeah, don't exclude yourself because you have no experience.
Chris?
The reality is it's not easy, but the payoff can be, from a number of perspectives, really worth it. There's not a ton of history, at least in K-12 public education around this, and so that takes some trust and some faith. There's little decisions all through the process. One of my professional colleagues in the room I saw calls them mountain of despair moments, where you're stepping off the precipice, go, don't go, those sorts of decisions. So this is not an easy process, but I think that the payoff for our little stakeholders can be tremendous. So we're really excited about it.
Craig?
I think my advice would be, if you're going into this, anybody can do it, but when you go in, for the architects and general contractors in particular, resist the urge to tell everybody what to do. Listen more. The trades have a lot of knowledge, but they're not eager to share it. We haven't sort of built up that trust with them yet, and focus on building that trust. You'll get great stuff. It'll take a little bit of time to get it, and then the team can really start to perform.
Okay, Jeff?
I think
Bring
from
us
our
on.
perspective, I think as a contractor, we're all comfortable with what we know and the way we've always done it when it comes to CCDC contracts and everything else. It takes a bit of a leap of faith, and for that you need trust, and you need the best team that you can possibly work with to make that happen. So I think selecting your team members is critical to the success of the project. You need to make sure that everybody's in it together, and we're all putting the same risk on the table. So I think that's imperative if you want to make it succeed, because I think the payoff in the long term could be really, really great.
Okay, please join me in thanking the panel for providing an insight as to their experience. And I'm sure if you have specific questions, they won't all disappear simultaneously, and you can ask. Thank you very much. Okay.
Well, thank you, Howard, Chris, Craig, Jeff, and Jason. We so appreciate you sharing your insights and your experiences. And Howard, your expertise particularly is much appreciated. We thank you for making the trip, for sharing with us so much of yourself. So let's thank them one more time. Some of you might be feeling, I need help with this, or I would need help. We're putting together curriculum that we've spent a fair amount of money on at the ECA to encourage virtual collaboration, to help people, architects work with engineers, work with the trades, work with the GCs, and we will, in essence, be moving those groups apart for special sessions, then bringing them back together to really become better equipped in these areas. So you'll see that those new training courses will be available in April, and we'd encourage you to participate in that. We do that to serve you and to address some of these needs that are mentioned here. This concludes our third annual Infrastructure Productivity Forum. I'd like to again thank you all for attending and contributing to the improvement of our industry. Our hope is that you can take some of the actions discussed today and apply them to your business. We want you to really keep improving because of what's discussed here, and we want you to work on that with each other. So to be out there talking, say, okay, how are we going to do this? What are we going to do next? What do we really feel we can do? Apply them to your next business opportunity, your next project. Thank you also to our special guests, to our sponsors, Procore, Stuart Olson, Aero Engineering, Delta Valley Landscaping, Silverstone Precast, Graham Construction, Shandos Construction, Eagle Builders, and our presenting sponsor, DIRT. We so appreciate your enthusiastic support. So one more hurrah for those people. Thank you. So for those attending the Builders Connect Luncheon, we invite you to move into the foyer where the luncheon pre-reception is just beginning. Please ensure you take all your belongings from the table, because we're going to flip the room, change its color slightly, and we'll need help. The staff would like you to move out fairly quickly if you could. And for those not attending the luncheon, we wish you a pleasant Friday afternoon, a great weekend. We look forward to your continued participation in future ECA collaborative events. Thank you all again and have a tremendous day. Great to be with you.